If you are pregnant or you've recently had a baby, this podcast is for you. I am your host, Kath Bequee, a physiotherapist working in women's health and mum of three. Inside my online program, Fitness Mama, I just love helping support women to care for their bodies during pregnancy, prepare their bodies for birth, and support their after-birth recovery, helping them feel confident and strong inside out during this important stage of their lives. In this podcast, join me each week as we dive into all things pregnancy care, childbirth, and postnatal recovery, helping you through every step of the journey. It is absolutely possible to feel amazing and confident in our bodies during this motherhood journey, and I want that for you. Come and say hi to me on Instagram at @fitnessmama, and let's dive into today's episode. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Fitness Mama podcast. Today, we're talking about hormones and fertility. I'm really excited today because I chat with Nat, who is an amazing natural fertility expert. And Nat aims to inspire wellness, not only to those embarking on becoming parents, but equally important to her is educating young women on how their choices shape their reproductive health. And our conversation does branch into this. So if you're raising young children, especially daughters, this conversation will be important to you. But whether or not you have daughters or you want babies in the future, or perhaps you've got many perimenopausal symptoms creeping up on you, or perhaps you're just not happy with your period and cycle, then I trust this episode about hormones and fertility, or hormones and our reproductive health, I should say, it will no doubt be really valuable. So I ask Nat questions about how hormone imbalance can cause infertility. What are some common signs and symptoms of hormonal imbalance that may affect fertility, but not just fertility, it's our wellness? What are some steps for someone who's wanting to find out more about their hormones, and how can we balance our hormones for fertility and beyond? We discuss birth control, as I said, in our younger adults, younger daughters, and there's all sorts of really important, amazing information we discuss regarding how our hormones impacts our life. I trust you're going to love this episode. Do stick around. First, as always, I do just want to say thank you so much for supporting this podcast along the way. This podcast is what I call my fourth baby. I love, love, love it. And I love chatting to the guests. I love getting the DMs from you all. I love reading each and every review. So if you're listening to this, a big thank you. And in fact, sharing, rating and reviewing this podcast is probably the most important way to help this podcast reach more people. So if you have one pregnant friend or a friend or family who've just had a baby, please consider sharing this podcast with them to help them on their journey. So thank you again if you're listening to this. I appreciate each and every one of you. Right, let's dive into this episode with Nat. Nat, thank you so much for joining me today on the Fitness Mama podcast. It's great to finally chat.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Do you mind, for those that don't know you, could you give us a quick rundown who you are and what you do?
Sure. Well, my background is Chinese medicine, and I started out in the industry nearly 20 years ago, back when people thought that people like me had a cauldron in their backyard and they were like concocting up stuff that was potentially going to cast a spell on them. Let's be honest. It wasn't as mainstream as what it is today, that's for sure. But I guess where I really got to hit the ground running was maybe 3 or 4 years into my practice. I just was constantly inundated with women who were seeking answers and weren't getting answers from their conventional health providers. And it was through no fault of the provider. It's just that the answers weren't really there. But I was seeing a common theme with patients, especially around their cycles. Ovulation pain was a really big thing. And so I actually did at some point say very boldly I never wanted to treat fertility. I didn't want to treat women's health. Hormonal women, to me, that was a nightmare. Like, imagine every single patient having hormone issues. That didn't sound like a good time to me, but over time, we just kept having more and more of these patients come in. And so I kind of surrendered and I was like, right, okay, well, I don't really know. Thing I ever taught correlated. I did gynecology and all of those subjects through my tertiary studies. And I just asked permission to practice on these women. I'm like, I don't know, let's figure it out together, So I started experimenting and I started researching and I started looking. And really what I concluded was that the symptoms that women were seeing were a direct correlation of our modern lifestyle, but science hadn't caught up yet. And so their doctor didn't have those answers for them because, well, that hadn't actually made that connection. And I think fast forward 20 years or 15 years, and it's very different. I think we can see that absolute correlation nowadays and no one's denying that. But we just started to treat towards that approach back then and we got very busy very quickly and just went on the ride. And, here we are nearly 20 years later and I can't say I'm mad about it. I feel very blessed every day. But I guess, we went out on a limb and we can just continue to be curious as to what our patients needed.
And it's such an evolving area. And obviously research does take a while to catch up on clinical practice, like, what we see and then what we end up treating. And it's only once people have been treating stuff for a while that they think, oh, maybe we should research this. So
absolutely. I mean, we've all of a sudden we're finding out that plastics in leggings is a problem. Like who would have thought? There's just things that constantly, and whilst we are so smart, there are so many things that we do that just actually are really illogical, yet we do it anyway because someone decided at some point that we were going to do that. So,
okay, well, let's dive into that more because today we're talking about, I guess, fertility and hormonal imbalances. But let's just start at the start. Can a hormonal imbalance cause infertility? And why do hormones matter when it comes to fertility? Just so that everyone can get on the same page.
Totally. Our hormones are our messengers that tell our body what to do and how to behave and work. And, there are some hormones that we have control over. We can go and do a workout and we can get a release of feel-good hormones, and that's something that we've been able to instigate consciously. However, our sex hormones, specifically that we're talking about when it comes to women's health, we don't have quite as much control over, although we do have some control, but not so much in the moment. It's more in the day-to-day, long-term, what we do to support those. So to answer the question, can a hormone imbalance cause infertility? Yes, it can cause someone to have what we would call subfertility. It doesn't mean they're infertile blanket. It means that as it stands, whilst that hormone imbalance exists, they're going to have challenges or it may not be possible to fall pregnant. So it's subfertility, meaning it's cycle to cycle, moment to moment, where we can see hormones impact our fertility, but not as cut and dry as someone who, say, has blocked tubes. Someone who has blocked tubes, that's a different scenario altogether, and it's more of a structural scenario as opposed to a hormone imbalance. And then obviously as we get older, our hormones change too. So that could be a factor. So yes or no is the answer to that.
Yeah, okay. Well, from that, what you've just said, and this is skipping ahead a little bit, but from what you've just said, what are the first steps for someone wanting to find out? Like if they're listening to you and thinking, oh, maybe my hormones are affecting my fertility or my mood or my sleep or whatever, or my menopause, like whatever it might be, what are the first steps for someone that's thinking, okay, I perhaps need to investigate this a bit more?
I think your body's always talking to you and giving you symptoms. And I think women's health is particularly interesting. If a male had symptoms repeatedly, he would go and investigate them. But for women, we've accepted that being hormonal means that at times we might not feel great, we might have pain, whatever the symptoms might be, and we kind of just see it as part and parcel of being a woman. No pain's normal. Period pain is definitely not. It's common, but it's not normal. And so looking at these symptoms as clues allows you to actually profile your symptoms, and it's actually quite defining in what the symptoms stack up to be. I've got a resource I can share with you. It's a hormone worksheet, and it's just a matter of looking at what your symptoms are and what you have the most of, to categorize those to allow you to go down that journey to see, do I have a hormone imbalance and what might the hormone imbalance be? Because there are many, many different types of imbalances. And I think that's where we get overwhelmed. It's like, oh my gosh, where do I start? So I think the first thing is, all right, looking at my symptoms, do I have symptoms? or not? That's the first point. And if I don't, then I think the other part to that is we've also adopted a mindset that tells us we're going to have trouble conceiving. We've already straight out of we decide we want to have a baby, and then we look around, and everywhere we turn and everywhere we look, it's almost harder to have a baby than not, which is crazy because we spend our whole life trying to not fall pregnant. So it's also at that point not adopting everybody else's belief and really making it your own way. And your body's designed to do this. So I have great faith that your body can actually do it. So it would be, if you don't have the symptoms, then, yes, it's just a matter of, some people might like to just go and get a blood test and see where things are at and go from there. Others are just happy to get busy and do what needs to be done. But if there is a hormone imbalance, if you've got anything from, heavy bleeding, irregular cycles, ovulation pain, period pain, any discrepancies with your cycle, then it's a good idea to jump in and try and figure out what's actually happening. And that could be one of many things, and to give yourself the best opportunity for conception and to really shorten that time frame in terms of how long it actually does take to conceive. And so it's really, for my patients, I try to get them to think about it well before they're ready to have children. In fact, at any phase, I say fertility is not about babies. It's about the state of your reproductive health. It's got nothing to do with the pregnancy. It's about the potential to conceive, but it's really about having a reproductive system that works properly.
Yes, I do remember going through my 20s and, a couple of friends who wouldn't get their periods for whatever reason, or for multiple reasons. But, yeah, and at the stage you think, oh, lucky them.
I know, right?
Yeah, and I know every situation is different, and I guess that's why it's great we're chatting today, because I really do think it's a holistic approach. It's touching base perhaps with a nutritionist, but also with your GP and with all the people that might be able to help. So you've talked about the common signs and symptoms of hormonal imbalance, so anything that's affecting the cycle.
Well, yeah, there's many,
okay.
There's so many, right? It could be acne, it could be pelvic pain, not just at the period time. It could be, there's just anything that the pill would be prescribed for is pretty much anything that would be a hormonal imbalance. Pills prescribed for everything from, even PMS, even PMDD, like there's headaches, migraines, you name it. Like if they're cyclic and it occurs within the cycle, then you can generally look towards your hormones as a trigger for those things happening.
Now, this is totally going off topic, but I remember in my teens and 20s, it was more often than not that we were on the pill, like women were on the pill. And I remember, like, me and my friends, there was a whole lot of reasons why we went on the pill initially. For some it was acne, for some it was, birth control, but there are lots of reasons. What do you say to young women who are starting to get their period, who's starting to look at getting sexually active in their teens or whatever? What do you suggest?
I love this question because firstly, we need to speak to the parent at this point in time as the example. And, if you've got a problematic cycle or a problematic period, why would your daughter want to have a period? Like it doesn't even, if you're sitting there complaining month after month about how bad it is, she's not going to want it. And you shouldn't be suffering either. So I think there's a piece of the puzzle here that's missing is, of course, we want the best for our children. But that starts with us as an example, as the parent. And so imagine if you had the awareness of your cycle from the moment, in fact, before you even got your period. It wasn't a taboo topic. It didn't just land on your lap at 13 when your mum sat you down and said, we need to have this conversation. It was an organic conversation that evolved over many years. So let's say at 3 or 4 or 5, when kids normally ask the age, where did I come from? You had a factual conversation at that point. And because for many of us, it's oh my goodness, is this happening already? Ask your father, the stork delivered you, the doctor put you in my tummy, none of which are true.
This episode is brought to you by Baby Bee, Australian-owned and designed prams combining quality, safety and style. Not only does Baby Bee let you try their prams at home with free returns for 9 months, yes, That's 9 months. They also offer an industry-leading 3-year warranty for total peace of mind. With thousands of 5-star reviews, around-the-clock customer care, and up to $300 of free accessories with every pram, what are you waiting for? Go visit www.babybeonline.com and check them out for yourself. And yes, for listeners of the podcast, there is a 20% discount code. Enter FITBEE, FITBEE 20 at checkout, and T's and C's apply.
And also in this day and age of, that might have passed when we were young, but in this day and age of the internet and how accessible information is, and this is a whole rant, not like this whole, I'm so passionate about this because young girls are Googling sex out of curiosity.
Yes.
And then they're coming against all these images of people being hurt or choked or like horrible images, and they're thinking this is the norm. And then as a pelvic floor physio, I'm seeing a lot of women with sexual pain, dyspareunia, and it's not always caused by these things, but that anxiety around sex and being scared of being in pain. I think it's something as parents we need to be on the forefront with our education to let, normalize it and let them know what is normal and what is not normal. It's not normal to be choked and feel like you're going to die during sex.
But to my point, I think it's just about having the factual conversations from the age that a child asks, because the age that they're asking is an age where they're ready to learn more. So following the cues of your children, if you were to say to your 5-year-old, well, mum has eggs and dad has sperm, and the egg and the sperm need to come together and be fertilized to create an embryo, which then grows in my tummy, most kids are satisfied with that. They were like, all right, that makes sense. I mean, I remember still up until maybe 2 years ago, I used to say to Liv, my daughter, who's now 15, I was so prompting of the questions. How does the sperm get to the egg? I used to say it to her all the time. She'd be like, it swims, Mum. And I'd be like, yeah, but how does it swim? She wasn't actually ready to hear. I kept actually kind of trying to promote this conversation. She's in year 7. I wanted to have the conversation with her before anybody else. But it's very interesting. We have an emotional attachment to a sexual encounter, whereas children don't. So if you give them the facts, they're really happy with the facts. Yeah. And it's really important the continuation of this conversation happens over a lifetime, not just about this, but, everything that happens to our bodies as a woman. If we have those conversations ongoing with our elders, I think that's important. So the first thing is, I think, having the conversation, keeping it factual, letting your own we can feel embarrassed as parents. And this one part of the reason I wrote Beautiful You was the book I wish I had when I had all the questions that nobody was answering, and to continue on this conversation. But then to the point where I'm really passionate about educating parents is that, and to answer your question about birth control, first and foremost, if a woman or a girl, a young girl, when she starts menstruating, understood her cycle, understood the patterns, understood when she was ovulating, and learnt that over a period of time before she was put on birth control, she has so much information already about her body that you and I probably didn't have. We knew that ovulation existed, but really we just knew that our period was due kind of every month. Nobody really taught us the in-betweens of that, how we could feel at different times and what that meant. So having that information and learning that is, I think, so important from when we start to menstruate, because most women only are invested in this at a time when they need to be, when they want to have children, only to discover it's all over the place and they don't get it. The second point to this is, very often young girls will be put on birth control at around the age of 16 because their periods start to become a bit irregular. But it's actually a natural process that young girls go through a phase around 16 years of age where it's kind of like the next phase of puberty, and they go through a period of time where, or I shouldn't use the word period, they go through a phase where their periods become irregular, their shape changes a little bit, they might have another breakout, like it's just a normal time, but it does very much mimic PCOS, and the cycles can be a bit irregular. And so as parents, we panic, we take our daughters to the doctor suggests birth control, and that's where that slippery slope starts. If you could actually just monitor it and watch it, and if there's no history of PCOS either, that's something else, then you know that it's a phase, and it's important that you just really manage lifestyle, stress, nutrition, and everything else at that time. Because the research tells us that the later we go on birth control, the less problematic it is for our long-term health. And the reason why that is our sex hormones as women don't mature until around the age of 21. If we start birth control at 16, we are halting that maturation, that process. And so let's say we're 36 and we decide, okay, I want to have children. So we come off the pill at 36. Our hormones are as sexually mature as our 16-year-old self. We have to start that process back up again. And that can be very problematic for a lot of women because they've had an underlying issue, or the pill actually does deplete vitamins and minerals and can also, come with other ramifications. So it is important to have these conversations.
Yeah, interesting. And I wasn't aware of that research. Is it the length of time that someone is on a pill that is an issue, or is it more when they start the pill?
It's more the reason that they're starting it, I think. If you are being prescribed, let's say you're being prescribed birth control for acne, but nobody's done any hormone testing to discover actually you have really high androgens and you probably actually have PCOS. PCOS goes undetected for 20 years and actually continues in the background to show up in other places. So often with PCOS, we see weight gain, we see facial hair, we see a whole lot of other symptoms. And that's true PCOS. There's various types of PCOS as well. But the point being is that the hormone imbalance never actually gets addressed. There are some people, and this is why some people can live their life very happily on birth control for many years and transition off and have children. It was likely that they didn't have any major hormone issues to begin with. So I think, yes, for some people, if their genetics predispose them, I think that birth control can be the problem. But I actually think the bigger issue is the underlying hormone imbalance that goes undetected for many years.
And out of interest, how solid is the research around here, or is it still in its early stages of research?
No, there's years of research in this area now.
Good quality research.
Absolutely. You could go, a book that I highly recommend is called The Pill. It's by Jane Bennett and Alexandra Pope. This book's been around for years. It was published like when I first started and they've continued to update it. But the research in here is phenomenal. First published in 2008 when they've continued. So, if we've been looking at this since before 2008, I think that it is, there's a lot of valid information out there now. And I think also the hard part here is, we're many, many, many years into women using birth control. So we've got years and years of data now. And I don't think it's like anything. I can't sit here and say that's the number one reason. It's to do with your genetic predisposition. It's to do with your diet and lifestyle. It's like there's so many feeding factors. And so I'm not here saying you shouldn't do it or you shouldn't take it. It's get all your information. Know if that's your best option. If you're using birth control, if you're using the pill or the Mirena, which are the two most common that women will use, if you're using it for birth control, it's very different than using it to treat acne or mood swings or period pain. They're two different things. So I think it's just having that information and being happy with that. And I feel like that's where a lot of women feel that their health is being discounted, is because they weren't given that information. They were told there is no problem with this. Women have used it for years and you're going to be fine, only to find out that they probably weren't fine. I think the other thing too is there's a great book by Dr. Sarah Hill. It's called Your Brain on Birth Control. She is a PhD. She's phenomenal. She's a psychologist. You should absolutely, that's another great resource for people if you want to have a look. She goes right into the science around how your hormones influence your brain, but what the pill does in stopping that from happening and the long-term impact of that as well. So she's coming at it from a different angle. Her research was more about, why are we seeing a lot of these irregularities for women in terms of their emotional health and well-being and their decision-making? And so that's another angle to look at. She was not ever there to kind of go, don't take the pill. She was more curious around how is this impacting our bodies as women and why are women different and how is this, what are the long-term impacts of this? So there is a lot of great research, but I do think that you need to just pave your own way, work out what's going to be best for you. And a lot of women will say to me when they come off birth control, I didn't know what it was like to be me. I didn't know I could feel like this, because it does change our hormones and therefore it changes how we feel.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much that we could be talking about. There's one more thing, or maybe two more things I want to ask you about. you mentioned it at the start, plastics and stockings. How is plastics affecting us? Because we all hear about plastic and we've all got off plastic, yet, plastic is still everywhere. I bought something from a shop, some pajamas, and I looked at the tag and saw that it was 100% made from plastic recycled bottles. And I was like, oh, my God, my kids are wearing plastic to bed? Like,
right?
Not cool.
Well,
I don't know. Does this matter?
I mean, again, it's one of these like incredibly amazing but not logical things that we've gone and done, if you know what I mean. Like it's great, but it's not great. Plastic mimics estrogen, and I would say for a lot of women, their estrogen is their main problem, whether they either don't have enough of it or they've got too much of it. But having too much of it, I would say, is probably 85% of women. And what plastic does is the chemicals within plastic mimic your body's own estrogen. Your body doesn't know the difference between its own estrogen and these estrogen mimicking chemicals known as xenoestrogens. So this can be a contributing factor for women if they do have too much estrogen. It shows up as issues like heavy periods, delayed ovulation, PMS, probably the biggest and most common symptoms, but also things like anxiety and weight gain. And yeah, it is a factor because let's think about it. We really should avoid heating in plastic containers, reusing water bottles. One-time use is okay, but continuing to reuse it is not okay. But even things like plastics that line our cans of our tin food, and there's plastics everywhere. So that is the reason why you might hear a lot of people or experts talking about plastics, and we do, I think, need to be really mindful. And the other bad news here is even if it's BPA free, it's still plastic. So it's slightly better, but it's still not great. So where possible, it's best to avoid. And here's the other thing. I say to women, if you can be mindful 80% of the time, you're doing a good job. Like, it is hard to try and factor all of these things in, and it becomes very stressful and overwhelming, and that's not what we want. So I think most of us have a little bit of flexibility. If we can try and do what we know to be best for our bodies 80% of the time, we have a little bit of flexibility that sometimes we might not be able to adhere to these, things that we're recommending, and that's okay too.
Yeah, I love that tip because you're right. You could go down a rabbit hole. It can be overwhelming just thinking about what do I start with first. And on that final note, a big final note, but apart from plastics, what are some, and I know you've got a whole course on this, so I will provide all the links for your resources in the show notes, but what, let's say 3 great steps that women could take today to helping to, I guess, not just, they might not need to balance their hormones, but to live naturally, to try to live in harmony with our body. What are 3 things we could be doing today?
Yeah, there's sort of a few main things that I will always say and start with. It's really important that you're moving your bowels every single day, which I know most of us go, okay, whatever, for many reasons. But if you are not doing that, effectively your excess hormones will sit in your bowels and you'll reabsorb them, and that can be problematic. So, yeah, a bowel motion daily is something that I would be recommending.
Love that, because for pelvic health, that's what we want. If you're having issues with incontinence, prolapse, leaking, all those sorts of things, the first thing we look at is bowels. But yeah.
So the second point to that is more fiber in your diet. Again, I think we understand that fiber is important for a healthy bowel, but I think it doesn't stop there. Fiber is a prebiotic. So generally fibrous foods help to feed the good gut bacteria, which is very important in metabolizing hormones. Fiber is also a binder. So if you've got excess hormones, bacteria, waste, whatever we want to get out, if we don't have anything for it to bind to, it's not going to easily make its way out through the bowel. So I say to patients, I would love for you to have fiber with every meal, ideally at the beginning to set the stage. But if that's not always possible.
Yeah, what's your favourite fibres?
I say to patients, if they can tolerate, almonds is a really easy one at brekkie time and it's, a handful of almonds before your breakfast, or a handful of berries. For lunchtime, it could be a carrot, it could be an apple, it could be leftover veggies from the night before. And then for dinner, whether it's you're eating your fibrous veggies first, your broccoli or your spinach or, whatever you're choosing, or a green salad. If you're out for dinner, order a green salad and eat it first. There's others, popcorn. I don't know. There's lots of, it's not hard to eat fiber. It's just, I don't think we're conscious about how important it is. And we don't prioritize it. I think we're good at prioritizing protein, and we should be, but we're not so good with the fiber piece of it. So yeah, bowel motion, fiber every day. And then to that point, protein is also really important for hormones. Your hormones are made of fat and protein. So prioritizing protein, especially as we get older, becomes very important. So if you just started with those 3 things, I know you would feel very different than if those 3 things aren't actually something that you've ever focused on.
Brilliant. Well, my final question, I don't really want to ask anymore because I know what the answer is going to be. But I'm going to ask it anyway. This sort of approach for women, who would it not benefit? Or is there anyone where it would be less beneficial for and they need to go perhaps more traditional medicine route? Or is this great in combination with whatever other treatment options they're having?
I mean, everything that I always share is general advice, and we should always be looking at our healthcare providers for specific individual advice. I'm yet to find a patient where a combination of, I call it your cheer squad, your healthcare providers that all work together in different lanes are all there cheering you on, helping you to get the outcomes that you want. So, I think where unfortunately a lot of women get very confused is they go to their doctor tells them something very different from their complementary therapist or their complementary practitioner. And that can feel very scary and overwhelming, almost like you're breaking the rules and doing the wrong thing. There are many, many amazing doctors out there that very much understand how important it is to integrate. And if you are finding that your health providers aren't on the same page, then you need to find better health providers. If that's something that you feel, if you walk away from your health provider feeling sick every time, that's not the right person for you. If you're happy with your health provider and you think they're amazing, then you're in a good place. You don't, So it is, I think, to answer your question, I've never found, hang on, that's not true. It depends on the specialty of the practitioner. I am never going to be one to, for example, treat cancer. It's just not my area of expertise. So I would never say, always try and find a specialist in whatever it is that you're looking for, or an expert, I should say, depending, and get your cheer squad together and allow them to work together for the best outcomes. I speak to people's healthcare providers, their specialists, their fertility specialists, their doctors, their endocrinologists, whoever it might be, all the time, some with resistance and others are very happy to have the support because that's not their area. But as long as we're all working together safely, I think that's the main thing. And I think complementary medicine has come ahead so far that it's much more respected than it's ever been.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing. Thank you so much, Nat.
You are so welcome. Thank you for having me.
I could probably have chatted all day about so many different things. So yeah, it was lovely to chat. Great to hear perspective and your insights on all things hormones and fertility. Yeah, it was fantastic. And I'm sure anyone listening has left with some words of wisdom, like some pearls of information. So it was great. Thank you for coming on.
Amazing. Awesome. Thanks again.
Catch you soon. Bye.
And before I sign off, remember my team and I will be putting together the show notes for this episode with all the links, including how to connect with Nat and those resources that Nat mentioned. And again, don't forget to share this podcast with a pregnant friend or a friend or family who just had a baby, someone close to you who you think might benefit from listening to this podcast. Thank you again, everyone. Come and send me a message on Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, have a fabulous day. And I look forward to you joining me next week for another episode of the Fitness Mama podcast. Thanks for listening to the Fitness Mama podcast, brought to you by the Fitness Mama freebies found at www.fitnessmama.com/free. So please take a few seconds to leave a review, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and be sure to take a screenshot of this podcast, upload it to your social media, and tag me at Fitness Mama so I can give you a shout out too. Until next time, remember, an active pregnancy, confident childbirth, and strong postnatal recovery is something that you deserve.
Remember our disclaimer: materials and contents in this podcast are intended as general information only and shouldn't substitute any medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. I'll see you soon.